The Maserati's headlights carved through the darkness over Biscayne Bay, and Daniel Kang had exactly 4 seconds to live his old life. 4 seconds before the SUV appeared in his rearview mirror, no headlights, just a black shape accelerating out of nowhere. 3 seconds before the impact, metal screaming against metal, his sedan spinning toward the guardrail. 2 seconds of weightlessness as the car launched over the barrier, the Miami skyline tilting sideways through his windshield. 1 second of water rushing up to meet him, black and absolute. Then, nothing. His chest hit the steering column, his spine compressed in a way spines aren't meant to compress. Cold water flooded through the shattered window, filling his mouth, his lungs, dragging him down into the darkness of the Rickenbacker Causeway's waters. Daniel Kang, the man who'd built an empire on other people's fear, who'd survived 3 decades in Miami's underground gambling network, who'd bought senators and buried rivals, drowned in 60 seconds. His heart stopped twice. The fishing boat that pulled him from the water wasn't supposed to be there. 2 brothers from Homestead, running an illegal night catch, saw the Maserati's taillights disappear beneath the surface. They dove in without thinking. One of them, a former Navy corpsman, performed CPR for 11 minutes until the Coast Guard arrived. The paramedics shocked him back to life in the helicopter. Later, one of them would tell a reporter, "I've never seen anyone survive that. Someone was watching out for him." They were wrong. Someone had been watching him, just not in the way they meant. 12 hours earlier, Daniel had stood in the grand atrium of the Perez Art Museum, accepting a standing ovation he'd purchased for $2 million. The Children's Literacy Foundation had been Victoria's idea. "It softens your image," she'd said 6 months ago. "People forgive a lot when you're saving children." He'd signed the check without reading the amount. That was the kind of money he used to spend without noticing. Now, under the crystalline lights of the gala, surrounded by 400 of Miami's most influential people, Daniel Kang looked every inch the philanthropist. Custom Brioni tuxedo, silver cufflinks his father had worn to his own wedding in Seoul 50 years ago. The practiced smile of a man who'd learned to perform warmth, the way other people learned languages. Victoria stood beside him, radiant in emerald Valentino, her hand resting on his arm with the precise pressure of a woman who'd calculated exactly how much affection the cameras required. She was 38, still beautiful, still capable of making a room turn when she entered. 9 years of marriage, and Daniel could count on one hand the number of times he'd seen her genuinely smile. He watched her work the crowd, air kisses for the society wives, strategic touches on forearms for the men with money, and felt the familiar hollowness settle in his chest. They hadn't shared a bedroom in 3 years. They hadn't shared a real conversation in longer. Beautiful speech, Daniel. Senator Richard Cole materialized at his elbow, bourbon in hand, the practiced warmth of a career politician smoothing his features. 61 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses and yacht decks. Really moving, the part about your father, powerful stuff. "Thank you, Richard, means a lot coming from you." Cole's eyes didn't match his smile, they never did. "We should talk soon about the future. Lot of changes coming to this state. Want to make sure we're aligned." Daniel recognized the subtext. Cole was reminding him of their arrangement, the campaign contributions that couldn't be traced. The regulatory decisions that always seemed to favor Kang Industries' shipping routes, the mutual blackmail material that kept them both honest. "I'll have my people call your people. See that you do." Cole squeezed his shoulder too hard, too long, and disappeared into the crowd. Across the room, Daniel caught his brother watching. Marcus stood near the bar, nursing a whiskey he wasn't drinking, his expression unreadable. 47 years old, the younger brother who'd always been smarter and always been second. Daniel had made him CFO of the legitimate business because Marcus understood numbers the way Daniel understood people. But lately, something had shifted. Marcus didn't return calls as quickly. He asked questions about accounts he'd never cared about before. Daniel made a mental note to have Jerome look into it. Then Victoria was pulling him toward the next donor, and he forgot about his brother entirely. The argument came later, in a service hallway behind the main gallery. Victoria cornered him between a catering cart and a fire exit, her champagne-fueled warmth evaporating the moment they were alone. "I can't do this anymore. We're not having this conversation here. We're never having it anywhere. That's the problem. I'm done, Daniel. I've been done for years." "Then what are you still doing here?" She laughed, a bitter, brittle sound. "Waiting for the right moment, but I'm tired of waiting. We'll discuss this at home. There's nothing left to discuss." She held his gaze, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes he didn't recognize, not anger, not sadness, something colder. "You should know that, by now you should know." She walked away. He stood in the hallway alone, the muffled sounds of the gala filtering through the walls, and told himself it didn't matter. An hour later he left. Alone. Jerome offered to drive. Daniel refused. He needed the silence of the empty car, the dark ribbon of the causeway, the space to think about a marriage that had died years ago without anyone bothering to call time of death. He was thinking about Victoria's eyes, that cold, strange light, when the headlights appeared behind him. Daniel woke in pieces. First, pain, a dull, throbbing wrongness that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere. Then fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell of hospital, voices speaking in medical jargon he couldn't parse. Finally, the absence. A vast nothing where his legs should have been. He tried to move, nothing happened. He tried again, commanding muscles that refused to answer, and the panic hit him like a second drowning. 3 days of tests, MRIs, specialists with careful faces. The diagnosis arrived in fragments, each word landing like a stone. T10 spinal cord injury. Incomplete. Paralyzed from the waist down. Possible partial recovery with extensive rehabilitation. No guarantees. No guarantees. The phrase echoed in his skull long after the doctors left. Victoria came on the second day. She arrived with photographers clustered outside, her timing impeccable. Daniel watched from his bed as she settled into the visitor's chair, arranged her face into an expression of devastated concern, and took his hand. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady, and she was already calculating angles. He could see it, the way her gaze flicked to the window, to her reflection, to the phone she'd positioned to capture them both in frame. She posted nothing, but she saved everything. After she left, Daniel stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she'd touched him without an audience. The process server arrived on day 4. He was young, maybe 25, with the nervous energy of someone who knew exactly whose hospital room he was entering. He left the envelope on Daniel's bedside table and fled without making eye contact. Daniel opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Divorce petition. Emergency motion to freeze joint accounts. Petition for exclusive use of marital residence. And buried in the dense legal language, a phrase that stopped his heart. Respondent has exhibited a pattern of controlling and emotionally abusive behavior, causing petitioner to fear for her physical safety. He read it 3 times. Controlling, abusive, fear. 9 years of marriage, and Victoria had never raised her voice, had never seemed afraid of anything except appearing at parties in last season's fashion. And now she was claiming she feared for her safety, in court documents, in language designed to destroy him. He called his attorney. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called Jerome. Boss. Jerome's voice carried the controlled tension Daniel had learned to read over 12 years. "I've been trying to reach you. There's a problem. I know about the divorce. It's not just that." A pause. "Your accounts. Someone's been moving money for months. Shell companies I've never seen before." The frozen accounts, that's just what they're admitting to. The real money's already gone. How much? "I'm still tracing it. But Daniel, you're worth maybe 10% of what you thought, maybe less." He should have been angry. He should have been plotting revenge, marshalling resources, planning a counterattack. Instead, Daniel lay in his hospital bed, paralyzed, betrayed, stripped of everything he'd spent 30 years building, and felt something he hadn't experienced since his father's funeral, complete and total helplessness. The mansion continued on without him. Grace Okonkwo learned about the accident from the evening news. She'd been ironing in the staff quarters when the anchor's voice cut through. Miami business leader Daniel Kang remains in critical condition following a single-car accident on the Rickenbacker Causeway. She stopped ironing, watched the footage of the wrecked guardrail, the Coast Guard divers, the hospital where he was fighting for his life. She felt something she couldn't name, not grief exactly, but not nothing either. 3 years she'd worked in this house. 3 years of polishing silver, changing linens, existing in the margins of a marriage that ran on performance and silence. Daniel had spoken directly to her perhaps a dozen times, usually to request something. Victoria spoke to her more often, but only in the imperative. Do this, clean that, make yourself invisible when guests arrive. Grace had become very good at being invisible. It was a skill she'd cultivated long before Miami, back when she'd worn scrubs instead of a housekeeper's uniform, back when invisibility had been the only way to survive her own failures. She went back to ironing, but she watched. Over the next 3 days, she watched Victoria make phone calls in hushed tones, her demeanor shifting the moment she thought she was alone. She watched Victoria remove documents from Daniel's study, files that looked financial, important, the kind of papers a loving wife should have been too distraught to think about. She watched Victoria smile for the first time in months, a small private smile that never reached her eyes. She watched, and she remembered, and she said nothing, because that was what invisible people did. Then the household staff received letters. Temporary leave, effective immediately, no timeline for return, no promises. Just go home, wait for news, don't contact us. Grace was told to stay. Maintain the property, Victoria said. Someone needs to be here. The house grew quiet, too quiet. A $40 million mausoleum where Grace walked alone, listening to echoes, watching Victoria prepare for a war her husband didn't know was already lost. On day 5, Grace made a decision. She waited until Victoria left for another hospital visit. Really just a photo opportunity, Grace knew, because she'd heard the phone call with the photographer. Then she entered Daniel's study. She'd cleaned this room 100 times, dusted the shelves, vacuumed the rug, polished the desk where he'd made calls that shaped Miami's underground economy. She'd never looked at the contents, never needed to. Now she opened the desk drawers with careful hands. Found files Victoria had overlooked, transaction records, bank statements, a ledger that didn't match the ones she'd seen Victoria take. She photographed everything, page by page, her phone clicking in the silence. She didn't know what she was looking for. She didn't know what any of it meant. But she'd spent 3 years watching this family rot from the inside, and she'd learned one thing: nobody in this house ever told the truth. Whatever was happening to Daniel Kang, he'd need proof. And proof was something invisible people were very good at gathering. She found him on day 7. The rehab facility was decent, not luxury, but clean, and Daniel sat in a wheelchair by the window, staring at a view he wasn't seeing. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically, he was still broad-shouldered, still carrying the presence that had made him formidable, but something behind his eyes had dimmed. "Mr. Kang," he turned, blinked. She could see him trying to place her, scrolling through a mental catalog of faces he'd never bothered to learn. "Grace," she supplied, "I've been your housekeeper for 3 years. I know who you are." He didn't, it was obvious, but he covered it well, the social reflexes still intact even as everything else crumbled. "What are you doing here?" "I brought your mail." She set the stack on his bedside table. "And this?" The folder was unmarked. He opened it, and she watched his face as he turned the pages, the bank statements, the transaction records, the shell company documents Victoria had missed. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, "Why, you haven't paid me in 2 weeks. I figure you're good for it." A joke, an absurd joke, given the circumstances, given that she was standing in the hospital room of a paralyzed man whose wife had just dismantled his entire life. But something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or the ghost of respect. You could have sold this to Victoria, to her lawyers, to anyone. I could have. Why didn't you? Grace considered the question. She'd asked herself the same thing, standing in his empty study with a phone full of photographs that could have bought her freedom from this life. Because I've spent 3 years watching people lie to you, she said. Your wife, your brother, your business partners. Everyone performing for the man with the money, the man with the power. I wanted to see what happens when someone finally tells you the truth. She turned to leave. Grace. She stopped. Daniel was looking at her now, really looking, for the first time since she'd entered his employ, seeing the woman who'd been invisible in his house for 3 years, who'd watched his marriage crumble and his empire hollow out and never said a word. Why do you care what happens to me? She didn't have an answer, not one that made sense anyway. So she told him the only truth she knew, because everyone else has already decided you're finished, and I've never been very good at agreeing with everyone else. The door closed behind her. Daniel sat alone in the fading light, holding documents that proved his wife had been stealing from him for months, and felt something he hadn't felt since before the accident, the first faint stirring of a will to fight. His phone rang. The caller ID glowed in the darkness. Marcuskang. Daniel answered. Brother, Marcus's voice was flat, businesslike, empty of concern. We need to talk about the future of the company. I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. You'll want to be there. A pause. If you can. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone. His brother hadn't asked how he was feeling, hadn't asked if he could walk, hadn't offered a single word of sympathy or support. And in that silence, Daniel understood he wasn't just fighting Victoria, he was fighting his own blood. The laptop screen showed Daniel exactly what his brother thought of him. Nothing. Jerome had propped the computer on the hospital bed, angling the camera so Daniel would appear dignified despite the wheelchair, despite the hospital gown he'd refused to change out of, despite everything. But dignity wasn't something you could fake when 7 people were deciding whether to erase you. The boardroom looked the same as it had for 15 years. Mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, the portrait of their father that Daniel had commissioned after the old man's death. But Marcus sat at the head of the table now. Daniel's chair stood empty, pushed into the corner like furniture no one needed anymore. My brother needs time to heal. Marcus's voice carried the practiced concern of a man who'd rehearsed in the mirror. I'm proposing we appoint me as interim CEO with full operational authority for the company's stability. Daniel watched the faces around the table. Some wouldn't meet his eyes, guilt maybe, or just the discomfort of witnessing a man's destruction. Franklin Park, his oldest business partner, the man who'd helped him launder his first million through import invoices 20 years ago, actually smirked. A small thing, quickly hidden, but Daniel saw it. I'm injured, Daniel said, his voice tinny through the laptop speakers. Not incompetent. I'll be back at my desk the doctors say you may never walk again. Marcus cut him off without hesitation, without apology. The company needs certainty, Daniel, not hope. Not hope. His own brother had reduced 30 years of empire building to a word that meant nothing. The vote took less than a minute, 7-2 in Marcus's favor. Daniel watched his legacy slip away with a show of hands, his face betraying nothing, his chest hollow with a rage that had nowhere to go. The screen went dark. Jerome closed the laptop gently as if the machine itself might shatter. I'll find out who flipped, Jerome said. Franklin was yours for 20 years. Someone got to him. Daniel stared at the blank screen. My brother got to him. My brother got to all of them. The empire he'd built, the legitimate face of it anyway, was no longer his. Victoria's television interview aired 3 days later. She'd chosen the setting carefully, a neutral living room that wasn't their home, soft lighting that made her look fragile and brave, a single tissue clutched in manicured hands. The local news anchor leaned forward with practiced sympathy, feeding her questions like communion wafers. I lived in fear for 9 years. Victoria's voice cracked at precisely the right moments. He controlled everything, the money, my movements, who I could see. I stayed because I thought I could help him, but when I saw the real extent of his business dealings, she paused, letting the silence speak. I couldn't be complicit anymore. The anchor's eyes widened. Are you saying your husband is involved in illegal activity? Victoria dabbed at dry eyes. I've said too much already. I just want to move forward. She never used the word abuse. She never said crime. She implied everything and stated nothing, leaving a trail of poison that couldn't be traced back to a single lie. Daniel watched from his hospital bed as the interview went viral. Within hours, hashtags multiplied across social media. Free Victoria, Believe Survivors, Kang Exposed. Think pieces sprouted like mushrooms after rain, surviving narcissistic partners, when wealth masks abuse. The courage to leave. Strangers who'd never met him declared him a monster. His name became shorthand for a kind of man everyone already hated. Grace sat in the corner of his room, a container of homemade jollof rice cooling on the bedside table. She'd started bringing him food 3 days ago. The hospital food will kill you faster than the accident, and hadn't stopped. Now she watched the screen with an expression Daniel couldn't read. She's lying. His voice came out flat, exhausted. All of it. I know. He turned to look at her. How do you know? Grace met his gaze without flinching. Because I watched her for 3 years, Mr. Kang. I saw who slept in whose bed, who made the phone calls at 2 a.m., who cried and who pretended to. She paused. I saw her meet with Ms. Sharma every Tuesday afternoon when you were at the office. I saw the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. The realization settled into Daniel's bones. Grace had seen everything. The empty marriage, the separate bedrooms, the slow decay of whatever they'd once pretended to have. She'd moved through his house like a ghost, invisible and omniscient, and she'd stayed silent. Why didn't you say something? Grace's expression didn't change. To who? You never looked at me long enough to hear anything. The accusation hung between them, quiet and devastating. She wasn't wrong. 3 years of her life spent in his house, and he couldn't have described her face from memory. He'd looked through her the way he looked through all the people who served him, as furniture, as function, as nothing that mattered. She mattered now. He just wished he'd noticed sooner. The conservatorship petition arrived on a Thursday. Priya Sharma's signature graced the bottom of the document, Victoria's attorney, and apparently much more than that. The legal language was dense, but the intent was clear. Daniel's mental state has deteriorated significantly since his accident. His erratic behavior and history of controlling conduct suggested he could not manage his own affairs. If the court agreed, Victoria would control his remaining assets, his medical decisions, his very existence. They weren't just trying to take his money. They were trying to erase him entirely. Daniel called his attorney. After 5 days of voicemails, the man finally answered to inform Daniel he was withdrawing from representation. Conflict of interest, he said, the phrase smooth and rehearsed. He didn't explain what conflict. He didn't need to. Daniel hung up and stared at his phone. In 2 weeks, he'd gone from a man who owned Miami to a man who owned nothing. Paralyzed, divorced, or close enough, stripped of his company, facing loss of legal autonomy, without representation. His accessible funds had dwindled to less than $400,000, a rounding error in his former life, barely enough to survive in this new one. He thought about his father. About the day the old man had died, when Daniel was 12, and the world had revealed itself as a place where strength was the only currency that mattered. He'd spent 40 years building walls against that revelation. Now the walls were rubble, and he was just a boy again, helpless and afraid. That night, Grace found him in the dark. The medication bottles were lined up on his bedside table, painkillers, muscle relaxants, sleep aids. Enough to make a choice if he wanted to make one. Wasn't counting pills exactly, just looking at them, thinking about math. Grace didn't tell him not to do it. She didn't lecture or plead or call for a nurse. She sat down in the chair by his bed and said, "When I was 29, I killed a patient." Daniel looked at her. That's what it felt like. Her voice was steady, almost clinical. "I was a trauma nurse in Baltimore. 3 patients came in at once from a car accident, a mother, a father, a 19-year-old boy, all critical. I had to make a call. I chose wrong." She paused, her eyes distant. "The boy died on my table because I spent too long on his mother. The mother died anyway 20 minutes later, and I spent the next 2 years deciding whether I deserved to keep breathing. The room was silent, except for the hum of machines. I thought about those bottles too, Grace continued, for months, and then I decided that dying was too easy. Dying meant they were right about me, that I was the mistake, that the world was better without my choices in it. She stood, gathered the pill bottles with careful hands, and put them in her purse. You can have these back when you've earned them. She left without another word. Daniel lay in the darkness, thinking about a 19-year-old boy who died because someone made a choice under pressure, about the weight of decisions that couldn't be taken back, about a woman who'd carried that weight for years and somehow kept walking. He didn't want to die. He just hadn't remembered until now that he wanted to live. The rehabilitation facility smelled like antiseptic and resignation. It was decent, clean rooms, competent staff, adequate equipment, but for a man who'd owned a $40 million mansion, every fluorescent light felt like humiliation. Daniel's room overlooked a parking lot. His neighbors were stroke victims and accident survivors, people broken by bodies that had betrayed them. He understood now why they all looked the same. Defeat had a posture, a particular slump of the shoulders that said, "I used to be someone else." Grace appeared on his first day, carrying a suitcase and wearing an expression that permitted no argument. "I'm your new live-in caregiver. The facility allows it, and frankly, you can't afford the staff here. I can't pay you. I know." She set the suitcase down and pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "That's why I have terms." Daniel took the paper, read it, looked up at her with something approaching disbelief. Her offer was simple: back pay for all household staff Victoria had stiffed when she dismissed them, $47,000, her own salary for the duration, and 1% of whatever assets were recovered from Victoria's theft. Paid when, not if you get back on your feet. That's insane. Daniel almost laughed. "You're betting on a paralyzed man with no money and no power. I'm betting on the only person Victoria Kang was afraid of." Grace's voice was calm, certain. "I watched her for 3 years. She was never afraid of being caught, never afraid of the law or the press or anyone who might judge her. But she was afraid of you." Daniel studied the woman standing in front of him. 34 years old, according to her personnel file, one of the few documents he'd bothered to read about his own staff. Nigerian-American, former trauma nurse, 3 years invisible in his house, watching the slow collapse of his life with eyes that missed nothing. "Why do you care if I win?" Grace considered the question. "Because I spent 3 years watching bad people win. I'd like to see what happens when they don't." He signed her contract. Written on rehab facility letterhead, legally dubious, probably unenforceable, but real. A partnership sealed by nothing more than mutual damage and the stubborn refusal to disappear. Rehabilitation was a war of inches. Daniel demanded to be pushed harder, faster, further than the therapists recommended. He fell on the second day, arms giving out during a transfer, body crashing to the mat with the graceless weight of a man who'd forgotten how to trust himself. He refused help getting back into the wheelchair. Fell again. Lay on the mat for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, his breath ragged and his pride in ruins. Grace watched from the doorway. She didn't help, she didn't speak. She just watched until he figured out how to get himself up. Night 1, Daniel couldn't sleep. His mind wouldn't stop replaying failures, the board meeting, Victoria's interview, his brother's voice saying the company needs certainty, not hope. He wheeled himself to the common room at 3 a.m. and found Grace already there, reading a nursing journal by the light of a muted television. She didn't ask why he was awake. She just moved her chair to make room and kept reading. Day 5, Daniel admitted the truth. "I'm terrified." The words came out in the darkness of his room, where shame was easier to speak. "Not of the paralysis, of being forgotten. I spent 30 years making sure no one could ignore me. Now I can't even stand up." Grace's voice came from the chair by the window. "Then we make sure they can't ignore you sitting down." Day 7 brought the first victory. Daniel transferred himself from bed to wheelchair without help, a process that had taken him 45 minutes of failed attempts, shaking arms and whispered profanity. When he finally settled into the chair, upright and independent, Grace nodded once. Not bad, she said. It was the closest thing to praise he'd ever heard her give. Jerome visited that evening, his face grim with news that couldn't wait. The SUV that hit you, it was registered to a shell company. The shell company is owned by another shell company, registered in Delaware. Whoever did this didn't want to be found. Can you trace it? I'm trying. But Daniel, Jerome paused, choosing words carefully. This wasn't random. This was professional. Someone paid good money to make sure you went into that water. Daniel absorbed this. Somewhere out there, someone had decided he needed to die. Not just lose his company, not just lose his wife, die. And they'd almost succeeded. Keep digging, he said. I want to know who's paying for my funeral before they finish planning it. Grace became a target 3 days later. The leak was professional, coordinated, devastating. Her name appeared in gossip columns first, then migrated to mainstream outlets with the speed of a virus. Paralyzed tycoons, caretaker, raises questions. The quotation marks around her title did the work of 1,000 accusations. The implications were calculated to wound. Was she manipulating a vulnerable man? What was her real agenda? Anonymous sources suggested she'd already moved into his room. The comments beneath the articles ranged from suspicious to explicitly racist, a cascade of bile from strangers who decided she was guilty of something they couldn't quite name. Her phone rang that night. Emeka's voice crackled across the Atlantic, thick with worry. "Eneni, your face is on Twitter. People are saying things. Are you okay? Are you safe?" Grace pressed the phone to her ear and stared out the window of the facility. "I'm fine, it's just noise." But she knew it wasn't noise, it was strategy. Someone wanted her gone, and they were willing to destroy her reputation to do it. Daniel saw the articles, saw what they were calling her, what they were implying about her character, her motives, her body. He'd been called worse things in his life, had earned most of them, but watching Grace endure abuse for the crime of helping him felt like a different kind of injury. "You should go," he told her that night. "This isn't your fight." Grace looked up from her nursing journal. "You're right, it isn't." She went back to reading. She didn't leave. The text arrived at 2 a.m. Grace's phone buzzed on the nightstand, the glow cutting through darkness. She reached for it automatically, expecting Emeka or spam or nothing at all. The message came from a number she didn't recognize. No words, just a photograph. Emeka, her brother, standing outside his apartment in Lagos, keys in hand, completely unaware that someone was watching him. The photo had been taken from across the street, through a telephoto lens, with the precision of a threat that needed no explanation. Below the image, 3 lines of text. "You should focus on your own family, Miss Okonkwo. Miami's problems aren't your concern." Grace's hands began to shake. She stared at her brother's face, the face she'd sent money to every month, the face she'd promised their mother she would protect, and understood what the photograph meant. This wasn't about Daniel's money anymore. This wasn't about Victoria's divorce or Marcus's betrayal or the shell company that owned the SUV. Someone wanted to make sure Daniel Kang never recovered, and they were willing to hurt anyone who helped him try. Grace's hands were still shaking when she showed Daniel the photograph. 3 weeks since the accident. 3 weeks of small victories, transfers without help, a psychiatrist who believed him, the fragile architecture of a counterattack taking shape. And now this, her brother's face on a screen, captured by someone who wanted her to understand exactly how vulnerable she was. Daniel studied the image with the cold focus of a man who'd received threats before, the angle of the shot, the quality of the lens. The timestamp in the corner showing it was taken at 6:47 p.m. Lagos time, when Emeka would have been returning from the accounting firm where he worked. "We need to get your brother out of Lagos," Daniel said. "Tonight." Grace stared at him. "With what money? You have less than 400,000 accessible, and that's bleeding out on legal fees and this facility, and I didn't survive 30 years by keeping all my eggs in visible baskets." Daniel was already reaching for his phone. "Jerome, I need 30,000 moved to a Lagos account within 6 hours. Use the Bermuda Reserve." Grace's breath caught. "You have reserves?" "Several. In places Victoria's lawyers haven't thought to look." He met her eyes. "Did you think I built an empire by trusting banks that report to the IRS?" Within 4 hours, Emeka was in a car heading to a safe house in Abuja, a security contact of Jerome's from his military days, a man who asked no questions and answered to no government. Grace spoke to her brother once briefly, heard the confusion and fear in his voice before Jerome's contact took the phone and assured her he'd be protected. She hung up and found Daniel watching her. "Whoever is behind this has international reach," he said. "This isn't Victoria acting alone. She doesn't have the connections. Priya doesn't have the infrastructure." "Then who? I don't know yet." Daniel's jaw tightened. "But they just made a mistake." "What mistake?" "They showed me they're scared." He leaned forward in the wheelchair, and Grace saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen since the accident, not hope, exactly, but hunger, the predator stirring beneath the wounded surface. "If this was just about money, they'd wait for the conservatorship. They're threatening your brother because they're afraid we might actually fight back, which means we're closer to something than we realized." For the first time in 3 weeks, Daniel Kang looked like a man who might win. The common room at 3 a.m. had become their chapel. Grace couldn't sleep, hadn't been able to since Emeka's photo arrived, and she found Daniel already there, his wheelchair positioned by the window where the parking lot lights cast long shadows across the linoleum floor. Their ritual now, silence, proximity, the unspoken acknowledgement that neither of them could face the dark alone. Tonight, Daniel broke the pattern. "Tell me about the patient," he said. "The one who died. All of it." Grace had told him pieces before, the bones of the story, the shape of her guilt. But he was asking for the flesh now, the blood, the parts she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. His name was Marcus. The irony tasted like ash in her mouth. 19 years old. He came in with his parents after a car accident on I-95. Father was critical, steering column through his chest. Mother had head trauma, bleeding internally. And Marcus... She paused, remembering. Marcus walked in on his own 2 feet, complained about rib pain, joked with the nurses about missing his exam the next morning. "What happened?" "Triage. We were slammed, 3 critical patients, 2 nurses down with flu, attending surgeon stuck in another emergency. I made the call. The father was dying in front of me. The mother was crashing. Marcus was stable, vitals strong, no obvious signs of internal damage." Her voice flattened. "I put him at the back of the line." Daniel waited. "By the time we got to him, his spleen had ruptured. Internal bleeding we missed because we weren't looking. He coded on the table. We worked on him for 40 minutes. Grace stared at the window, at her own reflection, older than she remembered, harder. "The investigation cleared me. Protocol was followed. The hospital's lawyers said I made reasonable decisions under impossible circumstances. But his mother survived. And she came to the hospital every day for a month afterward. Didn't yell, didn't threaten lawsuits. She just sat in the lobby and looked at me when I passed. And I knew she was right. Protocol might have been followed, but I still killed her son." Silence stretched between them. Daniel didn't offer comfort, didn't tell her it wasn't her fault, didn't minimize her guilt with platitudes. He just sat with the weight of what she'd said, giving it the respect it deserved. "You made a decision with the information you had," he finally said. Grace turned to look at him. "So did you, every day for 30 years. Did that make it right?" The question hung in the air. "No," Daniel said quietly, "it didn't." Something shifted in the space between them. Not absolution, neither of them believed in that, but recognition. They were both people who'd made choices that destroyed others, who lived with that weight pressing on their chests every morning, who'd learned that survival wasn't the same as innocence. Grace understood finally why she'd stayed. Not for money, not for justice. For the simple, terrible comfort of being seen by someone who knew exactly what she was. Jerome arrived 3 days later with a folder thick enough to kill. "The shell company maze is deep," he said, spreading documents across Daniel's bed like a surgeon preparing for an operation. 3 layers of corporations, registered in Delaware, the Caymans, and Panama, but I cracked the 2nd layer. Daniel leaned forward. "And?" "The SUV's registration traces through the shell companies to a law firm that handled the paperwork." Jerome's expression was grim. "Sharma and Associates, Priya's firm." Grace felt her stomach tighten. Confirmation of what they'd suspected, but confirmation wasn't evidence. "She's the attorney," Daniel said. "She could claim client confidentiality, Pretend she didn't know what the companies were for. Exactly, we need more. Daniel turned to Grace. You said you documented things. During your 3 years at the house, show me. Grace hesitated, then retrieved her journal from her bag. She'd been keeping it since her first month of employment, a habit from her nursing days when documentation meant the difference between liability and protection. Dates, times, observations, the small inconsistencies that accumulated into patterns. Daniel flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from curiosity to something approaching awe. Victoria's visitors when Daniel was traveling. License plates she'd noted in the driveway, late-night phone calls she'd overheard fragments of, discrepancies in household accounts that didn't add up, receipts for items never delivered, charges to vendors who never arrived. You've been tracking everything. I notice things. Grace felt suddenly self-conscious. It's a problem. Derek used to say I couldn't turn it off. It's not a problem. It's exactly what we need. Among her observations, Priya Sharma had visited the house 11 times in the past year, never when Daniel was home, often staying overnight, her car still in the driveway when Grace arrived at 6 a.m. to begin her shift. She's not just Victoria's attorney, Daniel said. No, she's not. The affair theory was confirmed, but more importantly, if Priya was emotionally involved with Victoria, her judgment was compromised. Passionate people made mistakes, and mistakes left evidence. Daniel handed the journal back to Grace with something like respect in his eyes. Jerome, I need everything on Priya Sharma, every case she's handled, every client she's represented, every bar complaint ever filed against her. That'll take time. Then start now. The hunt had begun, and for the first time they weren't the prey. The visitor arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Grace was reviewing Daniel's physical therapy schedule when the front desk called. A Dr. Derek Coleman was asking for her. The name hit her like a fist to the chest. 5 years collapsed into a single moment of recognition and dread. She found him in the lobby, still wearing scrubs beneath his jacket, still carrying himself with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his own excellence. He'd aged slightly, gray at his temples, lines around his eyes, but the expression was the same, concern that looked like kindness but felt like control. Grace. He moved to embrace her. She stepped back. I've been trying to reach you. Your phone changed numbers intentionally. Derek's jaw tightened, but he smoothed it away. I heard about your situation, the news coverage. I'm worried about you. Don't be. Can we talk privately? She led him to a corner of the facility's small garden, away from windows where Daniel might be watching. The October air was cooling toward something almost like autumn, though Miami never truly surrendered its heat. You don't have to do this, Derek said. Whatever he's paying you, I can match it. The hospital board, I've talked to them. They'd take you back. Trauma nursing, regular hours, benefits, a real life. I have a real life. This, Derek gestured at the building behind them, playing nursemaid to some disgraced businessman. Grace, look at yourself. You're all over the internet. People are saying horrible things. Your reputation was already destroyed. The words came out colder than she intended. You made sure of that. Derek's expression flickered, guilt quickly buried. That's not fair. I tried to help you. After Marcus, when you were falling apart, I did everything I could. You tried to fix me like a project, like a case study. Grace felt the old anger rising, the anger she'd spent 5 years trying to bury. And when you couldn't, when I didn't heal on your schedule, when I couldn't pretend to be the woman you thought you'd proposed to, you left. You left and you told everyone at the hospital I was unstable, that I needed space to work through my issues. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself from the embarrassment of a fiancé who couldn't stop seeing a dead boy every time she closed her eyes. Derek's mask slipped, revealing the frustration beneath. So what, you're choosing this? A paralyzed man with enemies everywhere, a fight that has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. Grace stepped closer, forcing him to see her, not the broken woman he remembered, but the one who'd rebuilt herself from the rubble. Because he doesn't look at me like something that needs fixing. He looks at me like someone who might actually win. Derek stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head, turned toward the parking lot. You're making a mistake, Grace. And when this blows up, I won't be there to catch you." She watched him drive away, his luxury sedan disappearing around the corner. Daniel was in the doorway when she turned around, his wheelchair positioned where he could have heard everything or nothing. "Old boyfriend, old mistake. He wants you back. He wants the version of me that doesn't exist anymore." Daniel considered this. What version is that? Grace met his eyes. The one who hadn't decided to fight. The conservatorship hearing required a psychiatric evaluation. 2 hours with a court-appointed psychiatrist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Huang who'd seen enough wealthy men faking competence to spot the real thing. Daniel would have to prove he could manage his own affairs, make his own decisions, live without Victoria's protection. Grace coached him the night before. "Don't try to prove you're the smartest person in the room. They already think you're arrogant." She sat across from him in his room, running through potential questions. Be accessible. Show them vulnerability without weakness. "I don't know how to be accessible. Pretend you're talking to me. Before you knew I was useful." Something flickered in Daniel's expression, amusement or its closest relative. "Before I knew you were useful, I didn't talk to you at all." Exactly, so this should be new territory. The evaluation itself was grueling. Dr. Huang asked about the accident, the betrayal, the depression that followed. She probed his relationship with Victoria, his business decisions, his plans for the future. Daniel walked the line Grace had drawn, honest about his anger, his grief, his fear, without letting any of them consume him. 3 days later, the report was filed. Mr. Kang demonstrates clear cognition, appropriate emotional regulation, and no evidence of the impairment claimed in the petition. Recommendation: conservatorship not warranted. Victory: small but essential. One battle won in a war that stretched ahead without end. And then Victoria's team filed their objection. The evaluation was compromised, Priya argued in the motion. Mr. Kang's live-in caretaker, Grace Okonkwo, has undue influence over the petitioned party. Her constant presence, her isolation of Mr. Kang from family and prior support systems, and her financial interest in his recovery all suggest manipulation. We request a second evaluation with supervised visitation only. Grace's name was now formally part of the legal record. The racial undertones of the accusations were clear to anyone paying attention. A black woman manipulating a vulnerable wealthy man, isolating him for her own benefit. The comments online grew worse. "I'm sorry," Daniel said when he showed her the filing. "I didn't want you dragged into, I dragged myself." Grace took the document, scanned it with the clinical detachment she'd learned in emergency rooms. "And I'm not leaving." Senator Richard Cole arrived with cameras. He'd called them himself, of course. The photographers stationed outside the rehabilitation facility, capturing his concerned entrance with flowers in hand and gravitas in his bearing. The performance of compassion from a man who'd built his career on carefully calibrated appearances. "Daniel." Cole settled into the visitor's chair with the ease of someone accustomed to uncomfortable situations. "I came as soon as I could." "This terrible situation, if there's anything I can do," Daniel kept his expression neutral. "That's generous, Senator. I didn't realize you were following my situation so closely. We've been friends for years, partners in many ways." Cole's smile was warm and empty. "I haven't forgotten everything you've done for my campaigns." The subtext landed exactly where it was meant to. 20 years of donations, some legal and some decidedly not. Money laundered through shell companies, funneled into PACs and super PACs, buying influence that both men understood could never be publicly acknowledged. "I've spoken with your brother," Cole continued. "He's concerned about you, the stress of fighting all this. Maybe it would be better to simply accept the circumstances, focus on healing. Let Marcus handle the business side of things." "Is that what you'd recommend?" "I'd recommend peace, Daniel, for everyone involved." Daniel studied the man across from him. 63 years old, 3 terms in the Senate, ambitions for a 4th. A man who'd survived scandals that would have ended lesser careers, whose survival depended on a network of mutual destruction that kept everyone in line. "Are you here to help me, Richard?" Daniel asked. "Or to make sure I don't cause problems?" Cole's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes went cold. I'm here because we've always understood each other, and I'd hate for that understanding to break down. He left the flowers on the bedside table. They smelled like funeral arrangements. After the door closed, Daniel sat in silence for a long moment. He's part of this, he said finally. He has to be. Grace moved to the window, watching Cole's motorcade pull away. Why would a senator care about your divorce? Because I know things about him that could end his career. Campaign finance violations, connections to people who prefer to stay invisible. Daniel's voice was flat, exhausted. If I go down fighting, I might take him with me. He's here to make sure I go down quietly. The conspiracy was expanding. This wasn't just family betrayal or a vindictive wife. This was political, institutional, a machine with more moving parts than Daniel had realized. They weren't just fighting Victoria anymore. They were fighting everyone who had something to lose. Marcus came 3 days later. He brought nothing. No flowers, no food, no pretense of concern. He sat across from Daniel with the expression of a man completing an unpleasant task, his eyes moving around the room with barely concealed distaste. I heard about the board meeting, Daniel said. Congratulations. Someone had to step up. Step up. Daniel let the phrase hang in the air. Interesting choice of words. Usually people step up when there's a crisis, not when there's an opportunity. Marcus stiffened almost imperceptibly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just something I've been thinking about timing, how everything fell apart at exactly the right moment. For some people, you're paranoid, you always have been. Paranoid people live longer in our business. Marcus stood abruptly, the motion sharp with contained anger. I came to offer you a deal, final offer, sign over your remaining shares, accept the divorce settlement, walk away. He caught himself on the word, didn't correct it. Leave this behind, I'll make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable? It's more than you deserve, after everything you've done to this family. Daniel held his brother's gaze. And if I don't accept, Marcus was already at the door, then you'll learn what you already know. You have no power anymore, brother, you have no friends, and sentiment won't save you. The door closed behind him with surgical precision. Grace emerged from the bathroom where she'd been waiting, per Daniel's request. Did you hear it? Daniel asked. Hear what? He didn't ask about my recovery. Not once. Not how are you feeling. Not will you walk again. Not even are you in pain. Daniel's voice was quiet, almost wondering. He talked about the company and the settlement, nothing else. So, Marcus has always been jealous, but he's never been cruel. Whatever's happening, it's changed him. Or, Daniel trailed off, staring at the door his brother had just walked through. The brother he'd protected, promoted, trusted for 47 years. Or I never knew him at all. Jerome arrived at midnight with evidence that changed everything. The shell company Maid, he said, spreading documents across the bed. I finally cracked the third layer. The company that owned the SUV, it's not connected to Priya's firm at the bottom. It's connected to something else entirely. Daniel pulled the papers closer, scanning the corporate registration, and stopped. Kang Pacific Trading. A subsidiary of his own empire, bearing his name, his signature on the incorporation documents. Except Daniel had never created it. Someone established this company 18 months ago, Jerome continued. Using your name, your signature forged, obviously, and they've been funneling money through it ever since. Nearly $2 million moved through accounts in Singapore and the Caymans. Who had access to create subsidiaries in my name? Jerome didn't answer. He didn't need to. Marcus. As CFO of the legitimate business, Marcus had access to everything: corporate formation documents, signature authorities, banking relationships. He could have created a dozen shell companies without Daniel ever knowing. It doesn't prove he ordered the hit, Jerome said carefully, but it proves he's been planning something for at least 18 months, long before your accident, long before Victoria filed for divorce. Daniel sat with the weight of it. His brother hadn't just taken advantage of the accident. His brother had been preparing for this moment for a year and a half, building the infrastructure for Daniel's destruction while smiling across the dinner table. What do you want to do? Grace asked. I want to be sure. Daniel's voice was steady, but his hands gripped the wheelchair arms with white-knuckled force. Before I destroy what's left of my family, I want to be absolutely sure. he looked at Jerome. Can you find the driver? The one who actually hit me? I can try, but Daniel, if Marcus really did this, he's not going to leave witnesses breathing. Then we better find him first. 3 days later, Jerome called. I found the driver. His name is Carlos Menendez, ex-con, gambling debts, exactly the profile you'd recruit for something like this. Jerome's voice was tight with controlled excitement. He was paid $50,000 to run you off the road. He thought you'd die, and when you didn't, he panicked and went underground. Where is he now? That's the thing. He contacted me, wants to make a deal. He'll testify about who hired him, provide documentation, everything. What does he want? Protection and money, $200,000. Daniel closed his eyes. I don't have $200,000, not accessible. I know, but Daniel, he says he can prove who ordered the hit, and it wasn't Marcus directly. Then who? A pause. When Jerome spoke again, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. He says the money came from a political fund, a campaign account. He has bank records showing the wire transfer originated from a PAC connected to Senator Cole's re-election committee. The room seemed to contract around Daniel. Senator Cole, not just an interested party, the man who'd ordered his death. We need to get to him, Daniel said. Tonight, whatever it takes, Daniel. Jerome's voice changed, went flat. There's something else. The police found Carlos this morning, dead, apparent overdose in a motel room in Homestead. Overdose? That's what they're calling it. Except Carlos Menendez had been sober for 8 years, documented AA meetings, the whole thing, and someone wiped his apartment clean before the police arrived. No phone, no laptop, no documentation of any kind. Daniel stared at the wall of his room, at the rehabilitation facility that had become his prison, at the shrinking horizon of his options. The witness is dead, he said. The evidence is gone, and whoever is cleaning up loose ends, Jerome finished the thought, just got a lot more dangerous. Somewhere out there, Senator Richard Cole was eliminating everyone who could connect him to attempted murder, and Daniel Kang had just moved to the top of the list. 6 weeks since the accident. Carlos Menendez was 3 days dead, and with him went their only direct link to whoever had ordered Daniel's destruction. Jerome's assessment was clinical, delivered in the spare language of a man who'd seen professional kills before. Clean job, staged to look like relapse, needle marks, drug paraphernalia planted, motel room chosen for its lack of cameras. Whoever did this has resources and training. This wasn't local muscle. Daniel stared at the ceiling of his room, counting the tiles for the 100th time. So we're back to nothing. Not nothing. We have the shell company. We have Marcus's access. We have the PAC connection to Cole. What we don't have is proof. We don't have proof. A knock at the door interrupted them. Grace answered it, and Daniel saw her stiffen before stepping aside to reveal a man he'd hoped never to see again. Detective Raymond Vance. 15 years with Miami-Dade homicide, the last 6 spent building a case against Daniel's organization. Gray suit, tired eyes, the expression of a man who'd learned to hate his job without quitting it. Mr. Kang, Vance entered without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. I don't have anything to say to you without my attorney. Funny, that's what your brother said too. Vance settled into the visitor's chair with the ease of someone who'd conducted 1,000 interviews in worse locations. I've been building a case against your organization for 6 years. Money laundering, racketeering, connections to cartels, you know this. Then arrest me. I don't have enough, yet. Vance leaned forward. But your accident created a lot of loose ends. People are talking who never talked before, employees, associates, people who suddenly see opportunity in your misfortune. Is that a threat or an opportunity? That depends entirely on you. Vance paused, something shifting in his expression. I came here because someone's been feeding me information about you for 2 years. Anonymous tips, documentation, enough to keep my investigation alive, but never enough to close it. I just found out who the source was. Daniel felt the ground shifting beneath him. Who? Your brother. Marcus has been building a case against you from the inside. And I don't think he wanted you arrested, Mr. Kang. I think he wanted you removed so thoroughly that no one would ever look at him. Words landed like stones in still water. Marcus, his brother. the boy he'd taught to ride a bike, whose college tuition he'd paid, whose career he'd built with his own hands. You're lying. I don't lie, I don't need to, Vance stood. You're a criminal. I have no sympathy for what happened to you, but I don't like being used. And if someone's manipulating my investigation to cover an attempted murder, that offends me more than your money laundering ever did. He moved toward the door, then stopped. I'm not offering you immunity. I'm not offering you a deal, but if you have information that leads to whoever killed Carlos Menendez, and I think we both know that wasn't an overdose, I'm listening. The door closed behind him. Jerome exhaled. Well, that's a development. Daniel's mind was already racing. Vance was a tool, a weapon that could be turned. The enemy of his enemy wasn't a friend, but he might be useful. Find out everything you can about what Marcus gave him, Daniel said. Every tip. Every document. I want to know exactly how deep my brother's betrayal goes. Grace found Priya Sharma at a cafe in Coral Gables, 3 blocks from her law firm. The kind of place where lawyers took clients they wanted to impress, exposed brick artisanal coffee, prices that announced their own importance. Priya looked up from her laptop with immediate recognition and immediate hostility. You shouldn't be here. This is harassment. I'm not here to threaten you. Grace sat down across from her uninvited. I'm here to tell you what's going to happen. I don't have to listen to. You created shell companies to hide Victoria's theft. Your firm handled paperwork for the company that owned the SUV that nearly killed Daniel. And when this falls apart, and it will, Victoria will blame you for everything. Grace kept her voice even, conversational. The nurse's station tone she'd perfected over years of delivering bad news. You'll be the convenient scapegoat. The ambitious attorney who went too far, your bar license, your reputation, your firm, all of it gone. Priya's composure cracked just slightly. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove anything, I just have to suggest. And I have documentation, 3 years of observations, your 11 overnight visits when Daniel was traveling, the shell company timelines that match your firm's billing records, the affair that compromises everything you've touched. How do you? Priya stopped herself. Too late, I was the invisible help, Miss Sharma, the housekeeper nobody noticed, and I noticed everything. Silence stretched between them. The cafe's ambient noise, grinding coffee, murmured conversations felt very far away. I didn't know about the accident. Priya's voice had changed, smaller now. I swear to you. Victoria said she was just protecting herself, getting out before what? Priya's face went pale. She'd said too much and she knew it. Grace pressed harder. Victoria knew the accident was coming, didn't she? She didn't order it, she just knew. Someone told her to be ready, to have everything prepared. Priya was shaking now, the confident attorney dissolving into someone who'd realized she was in far deeper than she'd understood. I thought it was just the business transition, Marcus taking over. I didn't know they were going to. Who told her? I don't know, I swear. She called him the senator's man. That's all I know. She'd get calls sometimes, and afterward she'd be nervous, excited. She never told me the details. Grace absorbed this. Priya wasn't the mastermind. She was a pawn, emotionally compromised, professionally exposed, useful only for what she'd accidentally confirmed. Thank you, Miss Sharma. Grace stood. When this is over, I'd suggest finding a good criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one. She left Priya sitting alone with her artisanal coffee and her dawning terror. War Council. Daniel's room, midnight. Grace, Jerome, and Daniel around the small table they'd made their command center. We have circumstantial evidence, Jerome summarized. Priya's partial confession, inadmissible in court, but useful for leverage. Marcus's shell companies, Cole's connection through the campaign fund, Vance's confirmation that Marcus was informing against you. But nothing that would hold up, Daniel said. Nothing that would protect us from Cole's political power. So what do we do? Daniel had been thinking about this for hours. The same strategic mind that had built an empire from nothing, that had outmaneuvered competitors and survived threats that would have destroyed lesser men. I need Marcus to confess. Jerome shook his head. He'll never confess to you. He thinks he's won. Exactly. Daniel leaned forward. He thinks he's won. He thinks I'm broken, defeated, ready to surrender. If I request a meeting, private, just the two of us, and offer to sign everything over. He'll gloat, Grace said, understanding dawning. He'll want you to know how thoroughly he beat you. Ego, it's always been his weakness. He could never stand being underestimated. Jerome's expression was skeptical. You want to wear a wire. I want him to tell me the truth just once, and I want it recorded. This is dangerous. Grace's voice was tight. If he realizes what you're doing, then what? He'll try to kill me again? Daniel's laugh was hollow. I'm already paralyzed. I've already lost everything. The only thing I have left is the truth. Jerome considered. I'll be outside, 2 minutes away. Any sign of trouble? No. Daniel cut him off, turning to Grace. If this goes wrong, you're the only one who can continue. You have the documents, the journal, the timeline. If something happens to me, you take it to Vance. You take it public. Daniel, he reached out and took her hand. The first deliberate touch between them that wasn't about caretaking, wasn't about physical therapy or bandage changes. Just contact, human to human. I spent 30 years building an empire of fear, and the moment I couldn't stand, everyone I feared walked away. You stayed. For 3 years, you were the only person who saw this family clearly. If I die tomorrow, I need you to make sure the truth doesn't die with me. Grace's fingers tightened around his. You're not going to die. Promise me anyway. I promise. The Biltmore Hotel, a private meeting room arranged through Jerome's contacts, neutral territory, elegant enough to satisfy Marcus's vanity, secure enough to hide the recording equipment in Jerome's car 50 feet away. Daniel waited in his wheelchair, positioned to appear as broken as possible. Slumped shoulders, weary voice. The performance of defeat. Marcus arrived in an Armani suit, a Rolex that Daniel had bought him for his 40th birthday glinting at his wrist. He moved through the room with the confidence of ownership, circling Daniel's wheelchair like a predator assessing wounded prey. You wanted to talk, not a question, a statement of power. You win, Marcus. Daniel let his voice crack, let the exhaustion show. I can't fight anymore. I'll sign whatever you want, just tell me why. Marcus smiled, the smile of a man who'd waited his entire life for this moment. Why? Because you took everything, Daniel, Dad's business, the empire. You kept me as the clean face while you made all the real decisions. For 20 years, I was your puppet. Marcus handles the legitimate side. Marcus doesn't need to know the details. I was always the little brother, the one who couldn't handle the hard stuff. I was protecting you, keeping me out of power. Marcus's voice rose, years of resentment spilling out. Keeping me dependent, making sure I could never survive without you. But I'm smarter than you, Daniel. I always have been. You were just too arrogant to see it. So you decided to take what was yours. I decided to be the one who finally had the guts to act. Marcus laughed, the sound bright and terrible. You built an empire on other people's fear, but you never thought anyone would be brave enough to come for you. Daniel let the silence stretch. Then carefully, the accident, you arranged it. Marcus stopped pacing, pride and caution warring behind his eyes. I arranged circumstances. Each word chosen carefully. I didn't pull any trigger, I simply created an opportunity. For me to die, for you to be humbled. Marcus moved closer, close enough that Daniel could smell his cologne, the same brand Daniel had worn for years, he realized. His brother had even stolen that. I didn't want you dead, Daniel. Death would have been messy, investigations, sympathy. No, I wanted you broken, paralyzed, helpless. So everyone could see that the great Daniel Kang was just a man in a chair. The wire was recording everything. Daniel forced himself to continue. And Cole, was he part of this? Marcus's smile flickered just slightly. Cole is insurance. He made sure the investigation went nowhere. He made sure the driver was handled. We understand each other, the senator and I. He killed the driver, Carlos. He cleaned up a loose end. That's what powerful people do. Marcus straightened his cuffs, a gesture of supreme satisfaction. And now, brother, I'm the powerful one, so sign the papers, live out your days with your little maid, and be grateful I'm letting you live at all. Daniel stared at his brother, this man who shared his blood, who he'd taught to ride a bike in the driveway of their childhood home, who he'd held when their mother died, who he'd tried, in his twisted and inadequate way, to protect from the worst parts of the family business. And who had tried to kill him. I have one more question, Marcus. What? Do you think I wore a wire because I wanted a confession, or because I wanted you to run? Marcus's face changed. Understanding hit like a physical blow. He bolted for the door. Jerome was waiting in the hallway, but Marcus was faster than either of them expected, adrenaline and desperation lending him speed. He shoved past Jerome, sprinted for the service exit, disappeared into the Miami night before Jerome could follow without revealing the entire operation. The recording was already transmitted to 3 separate locations. The truth was preserved, but Marcus was gone. 24 hours later, Marcus Kang was found dead in his penthouse apartment, apparent suicide, gunshot wound to the temple, a typed note on his desk. "I'm sorry for everything I did. I couldn't live with it anymore." The gun was registered to Marcus. No signs of forced entry. The security cameras in his building had experienced a technical malfunction between midnight and 4 a.m. Detective Vance called Daniel personally with the news. "This was staged," Vance said, his voice flat with professional disgust. Marcus was right-handed. The wound entry angle suggests a left-handed shooter. The note was typed, not handwritten, and your brother reached out to me 6 hours before his death. What did he say? He wanted a deal. He was willing to give me everything, Cole, the financial networks, the political connections, in exchange for immunity and protection. Vance paused. Someone was listening to that, Cole. Someone who decided Marcus had become a liability. Daniel sat with the phone pressed to his ear, trying to feel something. His brother was dead. The brother who'd tried to kill him was dead. He felt nothing, then everything at once. Grace found him in the common room at 2 a.m., his knuckles bleeding from where he'd put his fist through the television screen during Marcus's memorial coverage. Victoria had attended, dressed in designer black, performatively tearful for the cameras. Senator Cole had delivered a eulogy about a young man with so much potential, lost to personal demons. Daniel had watched his brother's murderer eulogize his victim with practiced grief, and something inside him had snapped. Grace cleaned his wounds without speaking, the careful efficiency of a nurse, the gentle attention of something more. "I hated him," Daniel said finally, at the end. "I hated him for what he did, for trying to destroy me, for being so goddamn petty after everything I gave him." He stared at his bandaged hand. "But I also taught him to tie his shoes. I was there when he graduated high school. I paid for his wedding, his first wedding, before she left him. I sat with him all night when Dad died because he couldn't stop crying." Grace said nothing, just listened. "He was my brother, and someone murdered him, and I can't even mourn him properly because part of me is relieved. Part of me is glad he's dead." Daniel's voice cracked. "What does that make me? Human." Grace's hand found his uninjured one. "You can hate what he did and grieve who he was. Both things can be true. When does this stop? The loss, the betrayal, when does it end?" "It doesn't end. It just becomes something you carry. You decide how heavy you let it be." She cleaned his wounds, bandaged his hand. Neither of them mentioned that she'd crossed every professional line. Neither of them cared. Vance pieced together the full picture over the following week. Cole hadn't just enabled Marcus's plot. He'd funded it from the beginning. The campaign account that paid Carlos Menendez traced back to a super PAC controlled by Cole's closest allies, money that couldn't be directly connected to the senator but formed a clear pattern for anyone willing to look. "The suicide was Cole's order," Vance explained during their second meeting. "The moment Marcus tried to make a deal with me, Cole decided he was done. This isn't your family drama anymore, Mr. Kang. This is a sitting United States senator covering up attempted murder and actual murder. Can you arrest him? Not yet. He's too protected, too connected, but I'm building something bigger, federal involvement, and your testimony and the recording of Marcus's confession is central to everything. What do you need from me? Go public. Not with accusations against Cole, that'll get buried, lawyers will bury you, but with your story, the accident, the betrayal, Victoria's theft. Yourself too visible to disappear." Grace spoke from the corner where she'd been listening. "That makes him a target. He's already a target." Vance's expression was grim. "The question is whether he's a target people are watching or a target no one will notice missing." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Do it. I'll give you whatever you need." After Vance left, Grace stood by the window, arms crossed. "You realize what this means? Going public. Everything about your business activities will come out eventually. The money laundering, the connections. I know, you could go to prison. I could, Daniel met her eyes. But Cole won't, not unless I do this, and Victoria won't, and my brother died for nothing unless I finish this. 3 days later, Victoria came to him. No cameras this time, no publicist managing her appearance. She looked diminished somehow, the confident cruelty of her hospital visit replaced by something approaching genuine fear. Daniel, we need to talk. We're divorced. We have nothing to talk about. Cole is framing me. The words came out in a rush. The investigation, they're saying I knew about the accident before it happened. They're saying I was the mastermind. I wasn't, I swear to God I wasn't. You knew, Daniel's voice was ice. Priya told us, you were warned in advance. I knew something was happening, I didn't know what. Victoria's composure cracked further, tears threatening. Cole's people told me to be ready, to have everything prepared. I thought he was just talking about the business transition, about Marcus taking over. I didn't know they were going to hurt you, to kill me. I didn't want you dead, I just wanted out. Daniel studied the woman he'd married, 9 years of his life. The woman he'd thought he loved, or at least the woman he'd convinced himself was enough. You knew someone was coming for me. You took that warning and used it to steal from me. You watched from a hospital doorway while I lay paralyzed. And you served me divorce papers before I could even sit up. I was afraid of you. No, Daniel wheeled closer to her, watching her flinch. You were afraid of this, of what happens when I fight back. That's what you were always afraid of. Daniel, please, get out, Victoria, and tell Cole that whatever he's planning, I'm not the broken man he's counting on anymore. She left crying. Grace watched her go through the window. She's going to run to Cole, Grace said. I know, let her. Daniel's voice was cold, strategic, the voice of the man he used to be. He'll see her as another liability, and we both know what happens to Cole's liabilities. Grace turned to look at him. Be careful, that man you used to be, he didn't have anyone worth losing. The words landed somewhere deep. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I know, that's why I can't be him anymore, but I can pretend long enough to finish this night. Daniel's room door closed, the rehabilitation facility quiet around them. The tension that had been building for weeks finally broke. It wasn't dramatic, no grand declarations. Grace was changing his bandage, his hand, still healing from the television incident, and Daniel caught her wrist. Stay, I'm not going anywhere. No, I mean, he struggled to find words. This man who'd commanded boardrooms, who'd made rivals tremble with a glance, couldn't find simple words. I know what you mean. Grace's voice was soft. She didn't leave. After, in the darkness, two people who had no business being together, who had every reason to walk away, lying in the quiet. I have nothing to offer you. Daniel's voice was raw. I'm paralyzed. I'm probably going to prison. I'm being hunted by a senator. This is, stop. What? Stop trying to give me reasons to leave. Grace propped herself up, looking at him in the dim light. I've had reasons. I've had 1,000 reasons. I watched you ignore me for 3 years and I stayed. I watched your wife try to destroy you and I stayed. I got death threats and my brother was targeted and I stayed. So stop asking me why I'm here and start asking yourself if you're ready to stop being afraid of what happens if I don't leave. Silence. I'm not afraid of you staying. Then what are you afraid of? That I'm not worth it. That you'll realize I'm exactly what everyone says I am. A criminal, a monster. Someone who deserves what happened. Grace's hand found his face in the darkness. You're broken, so am I. The difference is you're the first broken thing I've found that I want to help fix. Not because I owe you, not because you're paying me, because I think, she stopped. Think what? I think you might be the first person who sees me as more than something to fix too. Morning came. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Grace's phone buzzed. Jerome, turn on the news. Now. They found a working television in the common room. Senator Richard Cole stood behind a podium, American flags arranged with careful patriotism behind him, his wife and children positioned like props. After careful consideration and consultation with my family, I am announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. Grace felt Daniel go rigid beside her. Cole continued, his voice rich with practiced sincerity. and I want to address the scurrilous rumors being spread by certain criminal elements seeking to distract from their own misconduct. Let me be clear, I have never engaged in any wrongdoing, and I will use every legal means at my disposal to defend my reputation against those who would destroy it. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't retreating. He was escalating, a presidential candidate with Secret Service protection. National media attention. The full weight of political machinery ready to bury anyone who threatened him. He's declaring war, Grace said. Daniel's jaw was set. Then we give him one. 2 days later, Grace's phone rang, a number she recognized instantly, Emeka, her brother, calling from the safe house in Abuja. "Nne, are you there? I need to tell you something." Emeka, his voice was wrong, shaking. "What's wrong? Remember that man, the one who asked about you? Wanted to know about your employer." Grace's blood began to cool. "Yes, he contacted me again weeks ago before I came here, and his voice broke. I told him things about you, about your schedule, your address, the rehabilitation facility. I didn't know, I swear, Nne, I didn't know what he was doing. He paid off part of my debt and I was scared and I just..." Emeka. Grace gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. "What did you tell him?" "Everything, Nne. I told him everything." A sound in the background, voices, and now someone is here outside the safe house, and they're not Jerome's people. The line went dead. Grace looked at Daniel, the phone still pressed to her ear. "They found him, they found my brother." The attack wasn't over, it was just getting personal. The phone stayed dead for 11 minutes. Grace counted every second. Jerome's contacts in Lagos moved faster than anyone had a right to expect. Within an hour of the call dropping, he had confirmation. The men outside Emeka's safe house were local hired muscle, not professionals. Intimidation, not assassination. They dispersed when Jerome's people arrived, 4 men with military training and absolutely no patience for amateurs. Emeka was moved again, different city, different safe house, but the message was clear. "Cole is willing to reach across oceans to hurt you through me," Grace said. They were in Daniel's room, the television showing Cole's campaign rally on mute. The man who tried to kill Daniel was shaking hands with voters in Iowa. "He knows I'm the pressure point." Daniel watched her pace. He'd never seen her like this. The careful composure cracked, fear and rage and exhaustion all bleeding through. "I should go to him," she said. "Emeka needs me there." "That's exactly what they want. Separate us, isolate me. He's my brother, Daniel. And you're..." Daniel stopped. The words caught in his throat. He'd spent 30 years commanding boardrooms, terrifying rivals, building an empire on calculated speech. And now he couldn't find simple words. Grace turned to face him. "You're everything I have left," he said finally. "Not a contract, not a partnership, everything." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. "We bring him here," Daniel said. "My Bermuda reserves, whatever Jerome protected, we use it. Emergency visa, flight. We bring Emeka to Miami and we protect him ourselves. That's your last money." "I know." Grace crossed the room, knelt beside his wheelchair, took his hands in hers. "Why?" "Because he's your brother. Because you stayed when everyone else ran. Because..." Daniel's voice broke. "Because I finally have something worth protecting and I'm not going to let Cole take it from me." 3 days later, Emeka Okonkwo stepped off a flight at Miami International, thinner than his photos, eyes that had seen too much. The brother who'd inadvertently betrayed Grace to Cole's network, now under their protection. The reunion happened in the rehab facility parking lot. Grace ran to him. They held each other while Jerome kept watch and Daniel observed from the facility entrance, standing in his wheelchair's doorway, tears, recrimination, forgiveness, messy and incomplete, the way real forgiveness always is. "I didn't know," Emeka kept saying. "I swear, Nne. He said he was a journalist. He paid my debts. I didn't know what he was doing with the information." "I know." Grace pulled back, held her brother's face in her hands. "But you need to make this right. You need to tell the investigators everything you told that man, every question he asked, every detail." Emeka's testimony added another piece to the puzzle. The man who'd contacted him had mentioned the senator's campaign directly. Emeka had dates, descriptions, a phone number that, when traced, connected to a staffer in Cole's Iowa office. The net was tightening. Priya Sharma's world was collapsing. Victoria had publicly distanced herself, feeding stories to the press about how her former attorney had acted without authorization. Cole's people had made veiled threats, a break-in at her apartment, her car tires slashed, photographs of her parents' home in Connecticut arriving in unmarked envelopes. The Bar Association had opened an investigation. Her partners had asked her to take a leave of absence. Her carefully constructed life was disintegrating, and she had nowhere left to run. Detective Vance presented the choice in a conference room at the federal building. Grace was present, Daniel's proxy, his eyes and ears in spaces his wheelchair couldn't easily navigate. Ms. Sharma, you have two paths. Vance laid photographs on the table, Cole at his campaign rally, Victoria in her lawyer's office, Marcus's body in the penthouse. Path 1, you go down with them. Disbarred, prosecuted. Your name becomes synonymous with corruption. You spend the next decade fighting charges while your reputation is destroyed. Priya stared at the photographs. Her hands were shaking. Path 2, you cooperate, full testimony, immunity on most charges, you'll lose your license, but you won't go to prison, you'll have a life after this. They'll kill me. Priya's voice was barely a whisper. Like they killed Marcus, like they killed the driver. We can protect you. You couldn't protect them. Why should I trust you? Grace spoke from the corner where she'd been silently observing. Because we're the only ones with nothing to lose by keeping you alive. Priya looked up. The housekeeper she'd dismissed. The woman she'd tried to frame as a manipulator. The person she'd underestimated at every turn. Victoria would sacrifice you in a heartbeat, Grace continued. She's already doing it, feeding you to the press to save herself. Cole considers you expendable. The moment you become inconvenient, you'll end up like Marcus. We're the only people who need your testimony more than we need your silence. Silence stretched through the room. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Priya said finally. Most people are, Priya flipped. Full cooperation. Her testimony provided everything. Documentation of the shell companies Victoria had created, proof that Victoria knew about the planned circumstances weeks before the accident, Cole's involvement through intermediaries, and the complete financial trail connecting the campaign fund to Carlos Menendez's $50,000 payment. She also confirmed the timeline of Victoria's theft, 18 months of systematic embezzlement, beginning shortly after Victoria first connected with Cole's network. Not opportunism after the accident, preparation before it. The federal case against Senator Richard Cole began to build in earnest. Daniel followed Vance's strategy. He went public. The video was recorded in the rehabilitation facility's common room. Grace held the camera. Jerome stood guard at the door. It was just after dawn, the light soft through the windows, catching the silver in Daniel's hair. He'd rehearsed the words 100 times. But when the camera started recording, he spoke from somewhere deeper. My name is Daniel Kang. 7 months ago, I was run off a bridge. The accident severed my spinal cord and left me paralyzed from the waist down. In the weeks that followed, my wife emptied my accounts and served me divorce papers. My brother took control of my company, and I was told I would never walk again. He paused. Let the weight of it settle. I'm making this video because I want to be clear about what happened to me. My wife, Victoria Chen Kang, and my brother Marcus Kang conspired to destroy me. They didn't want me dead. Death would have been too clean. They wanted me broken, helpless, erased. Another pause. My brother has since been murdered. His death was staged as a suicide by associates of Senator Richard Cole, who funded and protected the conspiracy from the beginning. Senator Cole is now running for President of the United States. He's hoping his campaign will protect him from accountability. Daniel leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. I am not an innocent man. I have done things I am not proud of, things I will answer for in time, but I will not be silenced. I will not be erased. And I will not let the people who tried to kill me, who murdered my brother, who threatened the people I love, I will not let them win. The video went viral within hours, 12 million views in the first day. The narrative shifted. Daniel Kang wasn't a criminal making accusations. He was a victim demanding justice. Cole responded with threats of defamation suits. His lawyers issued cease and desist letters. His campaign released statements calling Daniel a known criminal trying to distract from his own misconduct. But the damage was done. Federal investigators publicly announced they were examining Cole's campaign finances. Media coverage turned skeptical, then hostile. His poll numbers collapsed. Donors fled. The presidential campaign that was supposed to protect him became the spotlight that exposed him. The federal case moved faster than anyone expected. Priya's testimony, Emeka's statements, the recording of Marcus's confession, chain of custody verified by 3 separate forensic experts. The financial documentation from Grace's journal, cross-referenced with bank records subpoenaed from 4 countries. Victoria's own emails, recovered from servers she'd thought were secure. It all converged in a federal grand jury room in Washington. D.C. Senator Richard Cole was indicted on 17 counts: conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, campaign finance violations, witness tampering, and accessory after the fact to the murder of Marcus Kang. The arrest was televised, Cole in handcuffs, his wife and children watching from behind a barrier of Secret Service agents who could no longer protect him from the law. Daniel watched the footage in his room, Grace beside him, Jerome standing in the doorway, Cole's face as they led him away, not fear, not shame. Rage, the pure, undiluted rage of a powerful man who couldn't believe he'd been brought down by a paralyzed businessman and a Nigerian housekeeper. Victoria was arrested separately. Charges accessory after the fact to attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement. Her bail was denied, flight risk, the judge determined, given her hidden accounts and false passports Priya's testimony had revealed. The last time Daniel saw his wife was on television, in an orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair unkempt, her designer composure finally, completely shattered. She looked smaller than he'd ever imagined she could. He felt nothing. Then slowly something that might have been relief. Detective Vance called that evening. It's done, both of them are going away for a very long time. Cole's looking at 25 to life. Victoria probably 15 years less with good behavior. My brother is still dead. I know I can't fix that, Vance paused, but I can tell you this. The man who killed Marcus, Cole's fixer, the one who staged the suicide, we found him. He flipped on Cole for a reduced sentence. Full confession. Marcus won't get justice exactly, but he'll get truth. For whatever that's worth. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, detective, for everything. Don't thank me. I spent 6 years trying to put you in prison. I still think you belong there for what it's worth. Then why did you help me? Because Cole was worse, and because, Vance hesitated, because I've been doing this job long enough to know that people are complicated. You're not a good man, Mr. Kang, but you're not the worst man I've met. And sometimes that has to be enough. The line went dead. Grace found Daniel staring at the blank television screen. Are you okay? I don't know, I thought I'd feel something. Victory, satisfaction, something. What do you feel? Daniel considered the question. Tired, just tired. She sat beside him, took his hand. Then rest, you've earned it. 8 months after the accident, the physical therapy room, parallel bars. The same bars Daniel had failed at 100 times before. Grace stood in the doorway. The physical therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Reyes, who'd never once lost faith in him, stood at the end of the bars. Daniel gripped the rails, his arms shook. His legs, those dead, useless legs that everyone had written off, trembled beneath him. He pushed himself up. For 5 seconds he stood, then 10, then 30. His own weight, supported by his own legs, for the first time since the bridge. When he sat back down, exhausted and triumphant and weeping without shame, Grace was already crossing the room to him. You said you'd never walk again. I said a lot of things. She held him, he held her, 2 broken people who'd somehow found a way to stand. 1 year later, the Kang Okonkwo Center for Trauma Recovery opened in a renovated building in Coral Gables, a rehabilitation facility for spinal cord injury patients and trauma survivors. Small, modest. Nothing like the empire Daniel once commanded. He walked with a cane now, 20 steps on good days, 30 on the best ones. The doctors called it a miracle. Daniel called it stubbornness. Grace ran the nursing program. Her license had never been revoked. The investigation triggered by Victoria's filing had gone nowhere once Victoria herself was arrested. Grace had left the profession by choice after her patient's death 5 years ago. Now she'd chosen to return. Emeka worked in the administrative office, still rebuilding trust with his sister, still carrying the weight of his inadvertent betrayal, but present, sober, trying. Jerome was head of security. He'd never spoken his feelings for Daniel aloud, probably never would. But he was there. He was always there. The opening ceremony was small, no press, no cameras, just the staff, a few early patients, and the people who'd made it possible. Daniel stood at the podium. Stood on his own legs, with his cane for balance for the full speech. I spent 30 years building an empire of fear. I thought that was strength. I thought control was power. I thought the measure of a man was the size of his bank account and the number of people who were afraid of him. He paused, found Grace's face in the small crowd. I was wrong about everything. Real strength is admitting you need help. Real power is letting someone in. I'm standing here today, literally standing, because someone saw me at my worst. Paralyzed, betrayed, destroyed, and she didn't walk away. She stayed, she fought. She believed I could be more than the broken man in the wheelchair. Grace wiped her eyes. Emeka put his arm around her. This center is named for both of us, because recovery isn't something you do alone. It's something you do together. It's not about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. The applause was small. Genuine. Afterward, in his modest office, Daniel opened his desk drawer. Inside, a letter from Victoria. Her first communication since her imprisonment, forwarded through her lawyers. He'd read it once 3 months ago, an apology or something shaped like one. I never meant for it to go this far. I was afraid of you, afraid of who you were, what you could do. Cole promised me a way out. I took it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry for all of it. He hadn't responded, hadn't decided if he ever would. Some wounds don't close cleanly. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, only carried. Grace appeared in the doorway. You kept it. I keep a lot of things. He closed the drawer. Reminders. Of what? Of who I was, so I remember who I don't want to be anymore. She crossed the room, took his hand, the ring on her finger, simple, modest, nothing like the diamond Victoria had demanded, caught the afternoon light. Ready to go home, home. A house in Coconut Grove, 3 bedrooms. A small garden Grace was teaching him to tend. Nothing like the Star Island mansion, nothing like the empire, just a life, their life. Yeah, I'm ready. Evening, the porch of their home. Daniel sat in a chair, not the wheelchair, though it waited inside for the bad days, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Grace joined him with 2 glasses of wine. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The neighborhood wasn't wealthy. The house wasn't grand. But there was a warmth here that the mansion had never held. A sense of belonging Daniel hadn't felt since childhood, maybe not even then. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, a blocked number, someone wanting something. There was always someone wanting something. He put the phone away. Work, Grace asked. Someone from the old life. They can wait. They can all wait. He took her hand. She leaned into him. The sun slipped below the horizon. The first stars appeared. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. A dog barked. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. Daniel had lost everything he'd built. The empire, the fortune, the power, the family he'd thought he had. But he'd found something he'd never known he was missing. Someone who stayed, not because he was powerful, not because he was useful, not because she was afraid of him or dependent on him or calculating her advantage. She stayed because he was himself, broken and rebuilding, fallen and rising, human. I'm not afraid anymore, he said quietly. Of what? Tomorrow, whatever comes next. I spent my whole life trying to control everything because I was terrified of what would happen if I let go. And then I lost control of everything all at once, and you survived. We survived. He squeezed her hand. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I need you to know that. Whatever I become from here, it's because you believed I could be something more. Grace was quiet for a long moment. You remember what you said to me that night in your room, when you asked me why I stayed? I remember. I told you I wasn't sure. That you were the first broken thing I wanted to fix, not because I owed you, but because I wanted to. She turned to face him. I know the answer now, why I stayed. Why? Because you were the first person who made me feel like I could be more than my worst moment. The patient I lost, the guilt I carried, you didn't judge me for it. You understood it. You carried your own guilt the same way. She touched his face. We're both people who made mistakes we can't take back, who hurt people we can't unhurt, and we're both trying to be better anyway. That's why I stayed. That's why I'll keep staying. Daniel pulled her close, held her as the last light faded. I love you, he said, the words he'd been afraid to speak for so long, the words that had seemed too dangerous, too vulnerable, too real. I know, she smiled against his chest. I love you too. The darkness settled around them, two silhouettes against the fading sky, one standing with a cane, one standing beside him, not a happy ending. Life didn't work that way. There would be bad days ahead, days when his legs wouldn't cooperate, days when the grief for Marcus would surface without warning, days when the weight of who he'd been threatened to crush who he was becoming. But he wouldn't face them alone. That was enough. That was everything.